Chapter 1. Minutes from Tragedy. The Crown Prince paced back and forth in his darkened chambers, gnawing his nails down to nothing, waiting for the summons he'd anticipated for hours, but never expected to arrive. The gilded clock on his mantelpiece had become an hourglass to the end of the world, each tick and tock whispering, minutes from tragedy, minutes from damnation. Not 30 minutes since he had sent his closest friend into hiding. The flurried exodus evidence in abandoned papers scattered across the floor. Poor Ghost. Poor, dear Ghost. For 8 years, the two had been as inseparable as an inkwell and quill. Perhaps if he was lucky, they would one day meet again. But Dorian Sinclair was never lucky. The hulking silhouettes of furniture appeared like hidden spectators. When he'd stormed inside earlier and waved out the servants, they'd left their chores unfinished. Now he paid the price, as he tried to pace in the dark without stumbling over abandoned buckets and rags. A shrill cry startled him from his thoughts. Whipping around, he pinpointed the raven rattling in its cage on the desk, feathers agleam in moonlight spilling over the desk. Wretched bird. He'd forgotten it was there, anticipating the same imminent news as him, at which point the raven would be released from its cage, and he would be locked inside his. Cursing the bird for the reminder, he whirled away to the frosted window. Hoar frost clung to the pane, breathing on him as he breathed on it. No stars tonight. The crescent moon filtered grey through the clouds over the four-cornered garden buried in snow. Snow flurried like white pearls over the parterre garden and hedge maze, piling onto that old fountain with limestone warhorses reared up against yet another violent winter. Their dichroic glass eyes weren't half as bright as when he'd splashed in the waters as a boy. Just another thing in need of repair. Another responsibility hanging over his head, like a sword he couldn't escape. Minutes from tragedy. Minutes from damnation. Footsteps sounded from the parlour outside his room. His chest clenched. The clock ticked louder and louder. Seconds from tragedy. Seconds from catalysm. Seconds. 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 The door opened, and his eyes fell shut. No time left between him and ruin. "Your Highness," said the sonorous Irishman behind him. "It's your father." Measuring his breath, Dorian asked with all the feeling of the frosty season, "Has the devil finally come to escort him home?" "Let's not get ahead of ourselves just yet." There was a smile in the voice. The black reflection of Patrick Teagan delved deeper into the room, amaranth robes brushing his ankles. A splinter of moonlight winked over his long face, highlighting salt and pepper whiskers. "The physician says he is more responsive for the moment, since his latest episode of—" "Call it what it is, Patrick." Dorian stared through the window, but he no longer saw the garden. Madness. Enough to rival Charles Le Fou. At first he'd found morbid entertainment in the steady unravelling of his father's mind, like when the king held council meetings in the dead of the night, without his council. But tonight had been different. Carnell's game of real-life chess with the courtiers had taken a violent turn. Dorian would never forget coming upon the blood-slick glass chessboard, as Carnell screamed for his white knight, or rather, the master of the hunt, to skewer his mistress, who played the Black Queen, and this was only after he had compelled the rook, to slice the throat of the bishop. When Carnell made to strike down his illegitimate son, Gabriel, the bastard boy panicked and stabbed his own father. What choice did he have? Madness was incurable. No one knew that better than the Noctivagants, the masters of madness. Few things made Dorian's skin crawl like them. They were supposedly chosen by the gods. There was a time when their abilities were hereditary, but the gods, determining that they had too much power, decided to distribute the power to a select few, most of whom had to seek it out. By a mere glance in one's eyes, they could penetrate minds, steal ideas, plant ideas, or deliver nightmares and hallucinations so monstrous, men killed themselves to escape. Minds were their playground. They would have reasoned it was customary to veil one's eyes in public. Dorian had witnessed their handiwork in hysterical acquaintances here and there. Once, during a party, his father's friend had begun howling and clawing at his eyes, screaming about a great bat he claimed to have swooped up from the pits of hell to drag him under. It took several men to restrain him, as a young Dorian was ushered from the party. But he was no longer a child. No one would lock him away in safety this time. His father must have come into contact with a Noctivagant, and, without his knowledge, the Nightcrawler looked in his eyes and gained access to his consciousness. That was why veils were essential accessories in Ravensdale, among unfamiliar company, to spare their minds from invasion. In the window, Patrick's reflection pinched his sleeves down to his palms. The doctors have done all they can. If the injury doesn't kill him, his madness surely will. He will be moved within the hour to Senonque Abbey in France. The monks will take care of him, as they did with your grandfather. Yes, his mad grandfather, whom he never saw again. I believe the time has come to say goodbye. Dorian nodded, more to himself than to Patrick. Mustering his strength in a fathom's deep breath, he followed him from his room. A maze of grand hallways, some ivory, some glass, some plated with gold leaf moulding, led them to the corridor outside the royal apartments, where Dorian's 3 illegitimate siblings held vigil outside their father's bedroom door. Curly-haired Xavier, whom Dorian knew as little more than a cold acquaintance who once pelted grapes at him during a dinner party, did not look up. Annalise, a blonde angel of 19, could not bring herself to feel a pain she didn't feel any more than Xavier. Gentler Gabriel, who had enjoyed their father's good graces, restrained an emotional sniff. They'd said their goodbyes. Now it was his turn. Dorian entered his father's bedroom, so timid the door almost clipped his back when it closed. It was warmer in here, though perhaps that was a trick of the oak-panelled walls, for anything reminiscent of a library was guaranteed to comfort. Servants rushed about with armfuls of garments, tossing them into coffers for the voyage. A group of councillors and lawmen murmured by a fire as they pored over the king's will. Dorian drifted to the bed, where the physician's shadow bled through the curtains as he bent over Carnell. Dorian came, halting and hesitant, around the side of the bed. He advanced until his shadow merged with that of the curtains over his father's face. Carnell Sinclair, pillar of the nation, was propped by pillows and oblivious to company. Oh, how the mighty fall. His handsome face gleamed with sweat, gaunt and green. Untidy whiskers filled his hollow cheeks. His 46 years looked like they had turned to 60 overnight. Dorian tried to swallow past the lump rising in the back of his throat. Clipping his heels together to boost his confidence, he folded his hands at his back. "Sire, Lord Patrick thought I should see you." Carnell's glassy, storm-cloud eyes scoured the room, unable to find whatever they sought, before landing on Dorian. His head twitched in confusion. "I did not send for you," he croaked in the voice of one already dead. "Yes, I know," Dorian said, deliberately patient. "That is why your secretary, Lord Patrick, someone must have called you in." Carnell heaved a ragged sigh, sinking deeper into the pillows. "They tell me I am being relocated for treatment. Are you happy now?" Dorian hesitated. He was grateful the physician pretended to be too absorbed packing medicines to hear them. "Should I be?" "It's what you've always wanted," Carnell said. "A life without me." Dorian said nothing. Was there much difference between an absent father, a mad father, and a dead father? Carnell's breath quivered as it left him. "You must be expecting some parting words. Come here, boy. Would you have me shout?" Dorian's heart fluttered involuntarily. He lowered onto his knees with unbroken attention, aching to hold that limp hand like a boy of 7, and not a man of 20. "In my absence," Carnell rasped, "the crown will fall to you. If only I could have bequeathed it in its brightest years. But without," he broke off in a horrid cough, bracing his mouth with a blood-stained kerchief. Dorian swallowed. Father had always told him he was too fragile for a prince, certainly for a man. He dared not shed a tear of confirmation. "Without Foreststone, the glass trade will crumble to ashes, and our fortune with it." "No, I won't allow that." "You." Carnell jerked his head in some show of dissent, coughing. "Your reign will be the death of this kingdom." A pained frown flinched across Dorian's face. He kept his head bowed against a new attentiveness that arose in Carnell's grey eyes as he studied him, like he was a painting under suspicion of fraudulence. A guard clomped into the room. "A carriage is prepared, Your Highness. The royal fleet waits to bear His Majesty to France." Dorian elevated a hand for silence. "No, one more moment." Carnell studied him. Glassy-eyed, face shadowed by the gravity of the hour. His father's next words were the quietest yet. "For all I am loathed for by friend and foe alike, I have but one regret." Dorian lifted his head little by little. "And what is that, father?" he prompted, tucking one gold curl behind his ear. "What is your one regret?" Carnell's lips twitched towards speech. "You." He lurched away in another violent cough. This time it wasn't letting up. Dorian was swept up in a wave of dizziness, blood thundering in his ears. "You." Too stunned to think, he pushed off the floor and backed away as the physician held a cloth to Carnell's mouth, streamers of blood spraying. You cannot take me! Carnell screamed, far from Dorian's mind, far from his own mind, as the delusions returned in full swing. His cough heightened until he was tearing at his throat. I am king! You cannot kill kings! Kings cannot die! Kings cannot die! Where am I to wear the crown if you take my head? Get off! Get him out of here! Now! The physician yelled, just as background to Dorian, as the courtiers flocking round. The guards collected the sheets beneath Carnell and bore him off into the hall, but Dorian couldn't sever his gaze from the empty bed, not even as the screams were muffled by the door swinging shut. You. The emptiness of the room was like a physical presence pushing at him from all sides. His father was dead to the world, as they called it when a regent was lost to madness. One foot in the grave and the other not far behind. The last barricade fortifying the floodgates of his deepest fears was gone. 20 years in the monster's household were now at an end. Perhaps he was happy. Away with sorrow. Leave him with rage. Rage just might be enough to keep him alive. Dorian emerged in the hall where his half-siblings and the courtiers waited to behold their new king. He stood, every muscle rigid, tears burning like bits of minced amber in his eyes, but he would not let them fall. Send word to the court that my father... No, that sounded childish. Tonight he must be a man. That the king of Ravensdale is no more. Dorian ascended the spiral staircase like he was sleepwalking, twisting one of his good luck rings around his finger. Everything had frozen, like the northern wind to witness this moment. He was circled by servants, one carrying the caged raven, others fixing a starry diadem over his forehead and spreading its black veil across his shoulders. A wise man never exposed his eyes in public, unless he had a death wish, or lunacy wish, in any case. A servant tucked one of his gold curls under the veil, and he swatted at them for touching his hair. The glow of torches widened as he reached the top, a cavernous mouth ready to swallow him whole. He'd never set foot in here before. It was a backstage for the successors of deceased or mad regents. He dragged a few steps forward, numb gaze straying over the discarded bird cages. Ravens were released for the deaths of monarchs, crows for lesser royals. The tradition had gone relatively unpracticed since the death of his mother 20 Januaries ago. Dorian lowered his silver-embroidered veil over his face. A servant approached with the caged raven, sight cast to the floor. Even veiled, low-borns weren't supposed to lock eyes with highborns. And Dorian accepted the cold cage, and his escorts left him alone. The boom of the tower doors thundered off the walls like the cannon fire of a distant battle. He was shut in with the bird in this lofty tomb. Now the weight of what was to come hit him. Ravensdale would pass to him. Him, of all heirs. Are you happy now, father? Safe behind the veil, he bit his quivering lip. Perhaps no one would know if he cried under here. A weakling's hope. Stiff upper lip was the path of princes. The doors growled open behind him. His heart leapt into his throat. Patrick Tegan pulled open the balcony doors like opening the gates of winter. Cold air coiled around Dorian, electrifying his skin, as light shot into the tower in one long beam. His shadow shot across the floor behind him, trembling and slender, and easily eclipsed by Patrick's. From the balcony, Lord Patrick glided inside. A ribbon of black silhouetted by the white light, he softened to the panic in Dorian's eyes. "It's time, Your Highness." He touched his shoulder and inclined his brow. A silent, "Can you do this?" Dorian's fingers, icy with fear, knotted through the bars of the cage until the knuckles looked like kernels of death white. He wasn't ready. He needed time to mourn, to find a way out. Above all, he needed Ghost. "Come, Dorian." The voice was a shade firmer this time, to remind him who he was, and what he must do. There was no escaping this fate. Ready or not, the curtains had been drawn. It was time to turn and face the crown. Doing as he'd done all his life, Dorian perfected his posture, and served a tie between his face and the honour within. No expression was better than a weak expression. He stepped onto the glass balcony. It glittered like a sheet of diamonds beneath his boots, and oh, was it slick in January. Ravensdale knew more silver skies than even Ireland. This morning was tinted coral from the rising sun. Mist scaled the white walls of the palace, the Chateau de Corbeau. Hundreds of people from all over Ravensnest, the capital of Ravensdale, braved the glacial cold below. The balcony was clogged with nobles, including his half-siblings. No cousin Dominic in sight. He was away at university in Italy, with that upstart Nicholas Aphonos. A servant held the birdcage for him, as Dorian collected the huffy raven, his fingers clumsy with cold and shaking with grief. Someone touched his elbow. He jerked away, earning a screech from the bird. Staring back was Cousin Moira, her doe eyes shining up at him in sympathy through the black tulle veil. Who did she think she was? She had caused him enough hurt, so he twitched her hand off him like an insect had landed there. As she reluctantly rejoined her mother and other companions, Dorian came to the rail, shushing that wriggling raven, and gazed out across the people. Patrick filled the void at his right. "The king is dead to this world," he announced, and Dorian released the raven, the symbolic soul of his father set free from madness and pain, as if he wasn't agonising away on a ship to France. The bird took off to the freedom of the treetops beyond. Oh, that he could change shape and fly away with it. A servant held out a teal and gold pillow, bearing the royal sigil. Dorian stared at it, as chants of "Long live the king" rose up around him. Quivering, he held the gilded ring aloft, running a thumb across the embossed raven. But he did not put it on. Instead he clenched it in his fist, knowing the torment that awaited him in the years to come. A tempest swelled inside him none could withstand, the clouds ready to burst. The storm had arrived. Here comes the rain. Chapter 2. 3 years hence. Although being private secretary to the king, rather, half-king, did have its perks, the downsides followed thus. People believed he was a perfect source of hearsay. Very true. And that he must know the king's whereabouts at all times, making him to blame when the king missed appointments. Very untrue. But that didn't stop the council from pointing fingers at Clovis de la Fontaine on mornings like this, when the golden wood throne at the head of the table, with its high back all bedecked with its rose window knots and meandering leafwork, was once again empty. Nothing worthy of comment, except that the other plainer 18 chairs were filled, and had been filled, for nearly 2 hours. A spotless attendance record was not to be expected, of course, but really. Even Windsor Bourreau, despite his inflamed gout, had managed to sit in at the meeting, or would-be meeting, if Dorian the Delicate ever bothered to show up. Sitting here in the tense air, Clovis feared he would one day follow in the footsteps of another infamous secretary in Scotland, who had met his end in a blaze of daggers. For men of such elevated stature, fidgeting was not permissible, but the silence was not deafening. It was broken here and there by the agitated or the indignant sniff, or the rarer but more potent sigh of a restless counsellor. One counsellor, Sacha Rafati, drummed the crushed mirror tabletop, blowing out his longest exhale to date. His brown eyes squinted in the light pouring in from the stained glass windows that covered the walls beyond the columns. Blinding light. Noon light. When they'd arrived, it had been morning. Might I be so bold, several heads turned as he spoke, as to suggest we commence without him? So this does not all come to nothing. The zeal to follow his suggestion was palpable, in the eager glances shooting here and there across the vast table like tennis balls. But, crossing his legs, Patrick Teagan bent an eyebrow with a relaxed smile. A wondrous notion, Councillor Rafati. His soft, Dublin accent glided over the vast hall. You lead the meeting. I'm confident you can provide His Highness a worthy justification for opening without him. Cradling his dimpled chin, Sacha slumped at the fort. He and many other councillors. As a rule, the king's compass kept their mutinous sentiments on a tight leash. But, in recent years, the practice was less of a bother and more of a battle. And, after hours of tedium, Clovis de la Fontaine, the half-king's gossip-mongering secretary, had an eye towards trouble. Do you know what the vulgars call him now? Clovis dipped his pinky in a floral teacup, stirring around the lemon wedge. The occasional king. Clever, no? Godfrey de Vincent frowned, and scratched his ghoul-white face, collecting powder under his nails. He's no king. No, not presently, Clovis conceded with a sideways nod. Not officially, that is. But since King Carnell's death to the world 3 years ago, Dorian had never let the crown leave his hands even when it's left his head. Recall after a 4-day reign, he passed it to his half-brother, quite unlawfully, and when his brother was killed, the crown returned to Dorian, so he tossed it to his sister, and when she died, his other brother, then his second wife, and the dance with the crown continues, said Godfrey, catching on. Perhaps when our busy bee arrives, he will finally name one of us his successor. Windsor Baru squirmed about, roughly the width of the brown bear that had died for his fur coat. Doubtful. He prefers to make us the spectacle of the world while he juggles the monarchy. His behaviour is that of a petty child, not the leader of a nation. You forget, the leader of our nation is a petty child, said Richard Brunais, in a lofty disinterest without looking up from his papers, likely relating to his family's bank. A great sigh gusted out of Windsor. Preposterous behaviour. Why must he make us wait on him, like we are unwanted guests? Clovis sipped his tea. Because we are. Because he can, said Patrick. Because he derives some sadistic glee from it, said Godfrey. Because, catching himself, Sasha measured a breath of composure. Clovis pushed out of his chair. Oh, come, Sasha. His Highness needn't know what goes on behind closed doors. From behind, he leaned an uninvited head over Sasha's shoulder. Tell me about how one man dragged us down into an emasculated society of silk and satin. He goaded, as if he didn't wear this culture well. Tell me how one man altered the very fabrics of monarchism by crowning bastard siblings or his prostitute bride. Tell me how, after Noctivagants, there is but one master of insanity powerful enough to drive us all mad. Tell me you hate him and wish him dead. But don't play coy. Sasha tilted his nose. You cannot tempt me. I know where your loyalties lie. I won't whisper an ill word against His Highness. Then whisper it not, but shout, that we might seize some pleasure from this wasted afternoon. At Sasha's refusal, Clovis waved him off with a disappointed ache. His eye snagged on that ostrich plume sticking out from the floppy hat worn by Cyprus Bledrigor, who was busy shuffling papers. What of you, my Lord Cyprus? You've been mum all morning. Cyprus glanced up with bright and expectant eyes, red curls peering out from beneath his hat. Oh, go on digging your own graves. I have nothing to say of His Most Royal of Highnesses. No harm in digging graves, so long as we don't fall in ourselves, said Lothario Knighton, boot buckles clinking with his bouncing leg. Between his black hair and white skin, he appeared to have crawled out of a coffin. He sent a deathly glare to his mother, Elizabeth Hennequin, as she plied away on an embroidery hoop in quiet satisfaction, which was far worse than her usual sardonic comments. Care to share what you find so amusing, Your Grace? Elizabeth's feline eyes lashed up at him between swirls of ginger hair, a smile scrunching her lips. You wouldn't care to hear it, Your Other Grace, she answered her son. The way you all chatter on, as if it'll make a difference. You would sooner bridle a wolf than pin down Dorian Sinclair. You find him charming, don't you? Quite. I was his governess long enough to learn how the world works in that golden head of his. When he says, report here after breakfast, he does not mean promptly. He means sometime in the preceding hours. I am sure if you took it up with him, his second defence would be to remind you that not everyone breaks the fast at the same moment. Therefore he has much latitude. Windsor glowered at the doors. Where in Hades could that brat be? Clovis dropped back into his chair. Selecting an outfit, most likely. He takes great pains with his hair and wardrobe. He swiped a hand through his own shoulder-length tresses in imitation. Lothario scraped at the arms of his chair where he scratched off the wood many times before. Yes. It's manifest he was raised by a woman. He sent another glare at his mother's contented dimples. Or he may be bathing again, Sasha suggested. Did he not bathe yesterday? Godfrey asked. Yes, thrice, said Clovis. He believes bathing cleanses him of impurity, or something like that. Lothario bit a splinter from his finger and snorted. The narcissist is more bitch than bastard, more queen than king. At least he bathes at all, your grace, said Elizabeth. You would not hurt to imitate him. Sasha alternated his chin between palms, eyeing Richard, who continued reading papers relating to his uncle's bank. Do you care so little for your own nation that our regent's behaviour causes no concern? Hardly. Richard sipped his cold tea. But, until my Uncle Gerard falls out of bed with the crown, it changes nothing for me. On the subject of falling out of bed, Lothario said, I hear, from those posh clubs of theirs, that Dorian has fallen into bed with those gentlemen who buzz about him. Having been there, I'm afraid I must disappoint you, said Clovis. It's true Dorian never seeks the company of women, said Godfrey, ignoring Clovis's objection. He has rejected every lady we've sent over the years. But he also dismisses the men. Margaret Rue, a tall woman of spindly proportions, tucked a foot behind her ankle, under sapphire silk skirts. He does seem rather keen on those pretty boy friends he keeps. As the father of one of those pretty boy friends, said Leviticus Ophonos, relaxing against his chair, I can vouch that neither my son nor any of his friends are degenerates. Before other parents could add their voices, Clovis chuckled, saying, as one of his pretty boy friends, I can attest otherwise, though I can only speak for myself on that account. Perhaps we ought to wrangle the truth from the prince's confessor, said Sasha. Oh, good luck, Richard laughed. I doubt he's made one honest confession in his life. Besides, rumour is he hasn't gone since he was 16. That must have been when he discovered his unconventional yearnings, said Lothario. How else can he account for his failure to provide an heir, after 3 marriages? You forget Queen Elspeth's stillborn son, Elizabeth countered. Lothario lit up with a laugh. Oh, yes, the Queen of Whores. Very trustworthy. Patrick tusked. Manners, your grace. If what Lothario says is true, said young Sasha, is it any wonder Queen Elspeth went mad? I am close to the same, if he doesn't arrive soon. Oh, don't tease me, Lothario whined. Pupil shrunken in the daylight, his bright eyes flicked to Sasha. I'm starved for something stimulating. Your grace, Patrick said threateningly. Bite me, old man. Lothario scraped his armrests in agitation. Sod this. To the surprise of all, he pushed up, chair screeching, and seized his coat from the back of his seat. Godfrey grabbed his arm. Your Grace, you can't just... Lothario wrenched free. Look, if that spoiled, idling Hyacinthus doesn't show his pretty face this instant... One of the mighty French doors cracked open. Prince Dorian poked his perky nose into the council chamber. For a long, painful moment, he stared at the room full of incensed councillors. His faint eyebrows came together in a frown. Sorry. Wrong room. And his sunny ringlets and pink ruby earrings whisked out the door. Now, the silence was deafening, until the doors hurtled open with a resounding crash against the walls. Dorian Midas Sinclair the First sashayed inside like nothing had happened. He had the look of a Sinclair through and through. Rumour said they maintained their famous blue eyes and blonde hair, defined as turquoise and gold, the country's colours, by breeding with Norwegians or inbreeding with each other. But then again, rumour had much to say of the Sinclairs. His throng of brightly dressed gentlemen trooped in after him, coming down from cackling at some secret joke, sporting their customary three-piece court suits. In his own suit of black and pomegranate red, Dorian twirled to face his followers. Come no farther, he said, his voice doubly deep and effete. I shall not require my ass-kisses again until target practice. The band exuded sarcastic chuckles and a few choice comments as he waved them back. Run along, now. Off you go. As they trickled out into the hall, Dorian marched up to the glass table and used Windsor's seat as a stepladder to the tabletop. French heels clacking, he walked across the tabletop, like a cat across a harpsichord, jounced down into his chair, and crossed his legs over the armrest. I hope I'm not late. Your Highness, are you listening? It is vital we have your full attention. Dorian lounged at the head of the table, wrist cocked in the air. He toyed with the lapis lazuli stone from his many rings, like a theatre-goer who had no love of the play. The councillor's voice was a circling buzzard for all the mind he paid it, but where one buzzard went, another was sure to follow, and right on cue. My lord? My counsellor? Dorian mimicked, sighing like the mere effort of retraining his vision exhausted him. Did you ask something? Godfrey fidgeted, so short one wondered if his feet touched the floor. Yes, your highness. I only wish to ensure you are paying heed to this discussion. This discussion? Dorian flicked his wrist between them. This discussion. Yes. The previous is a tad hazy. Would it be a great bother for you to brief me? No, your highness, Godfrey gritted out, smile so tight his teeth might break. Not at all. Today the climate was transparently impatient. They were sick of him. Very sick of him. It was dangerous to hiss at a table of Goliaths, but oh so tempting. He ascended back to his thoughts, allowing his eyes to drift out of focus where the table glittered like a fallen chandelier. For superstitious reasons, he loathed the crushed mirror trend. The hundreds of mirrors shattered for one table would surely bring centuries of bad luck on his country. And that was the last thing he needed. My prince. Clovis inched forward, touching the royal armrest before Dorian's steely glare made him rethink that. "We were deliberating over what shall become of the crown, if you still refuse to wear it." "Dance about the subject all you like. It changes nothing." Lothario stared with big eyes that would shine like a wolf's in the dark. He was one of those sorts whose appearance was handsome under some conditions, and average under others, owed to variations between personal grooming and facial animation. "Now that so few relatives remain, notwithstanding myself and my daughter," said Aunt Margaret, arms dangling listlessly from her chair, "we are curious what you intend." "It seems you are all quite curious, aren't you? You know," Dorian adopted a mode of patronisation, "I have heard tell curiosity is a danger." At the unanimous groan along the table, Dorian smiled to himself. They would testify his sole purpose in life was to drive them to madness. He was a prick by profession. Here, politics were a battlefield, where a mask was the only suitable armour, and a silver tongue the only appropriate weapon. And much to heighten his pride, Dorian was a political snake. All afternoon he'd guided their conversations down twists and turns of slippery speech straight to dead ends, until each was baffled to find themselves right back where they started. Just as all roads led to Rome, all discussion led to nothing. "Your Highness," Elizabeth sighed, plopping her embroidery hoop on the table. As she leaned forward, strands of her chignon tumbling into her eyes. Sometimes Dorian still looked at her, and saw the governess she had once been. "By now you are giving me a headache, and I am certain Windsor's heart will fail if he's riled any further." "That is hardly reason to stop," said Dorian, a thrill building in his eyes as he looked at a Henry VIII-sized counsellor. Leviticus Ophonos, who never seemed to stop fidgeting with those graceful hands of his, asked, "My lord, may we please return to the matter at hand?" Dorian put on a practised frown. "Which matter?" "Oh, yes, of course. I suppose we should get this nasty business of taxes sorted out." A dread-filled silence fell in the expectation of another linguistic goose chase. A few seats down, Patrick exhaled, a clue of amusement in the corner of his mouth. Raoul Lacroix untied his red necktie for air. "We were not discussing taxes, sire," he said boredly. Dorian cocked his head. "Were we not?" "No, your Highness. We were discussing our next ruler." "I wasn't aware we had one yet." "We don't, sire. That's precisely why we are discussing it. How can we discuss our next ruler if we do not yet have one?" Windsor reclined with exhaustion, chair squealing in pain. "King Carnell would never have disgraced us in this manner." Dorian's sight shot to the counsellor. Yes, beloved Carnell the Clement seemed determined to have his name heard every meeting, brandished like a sword against him. But Carnell had not suffered an inch of the disdain which had plagued Dorian from the moment the crown first touched his curly head. "We have grown tired of your tricks, sire," said Godfrey, his voice close to breaking point. "Answer directly, if you are capable. Have you chosen your successor?" The question lingered in the air, as the council stared on in waxing desperation. It seemed a pity to end the game now, but all good things must come to an end. He took a breath, tracing a circle on the table. "I have." He could taste the relief as they relaxed into sighs. My gaze has fallen on another young cousin of mine, unknown until recently. Lothario stopped drumming his armrests. Who is it? Dorian grinned, cupping his hands over his knee. You will see for yourselves when my chosen one arrives on Palm Sunday. Palm Sun... Godfrey spluttered. That's tomorrow! A rather appropriate date for the arrival of a king, don't you think? As if I would have ordered such costly flowers without a special flair to the occasion. What would you say? Lilies or purple roses? Purple roses signify royalty, but lilies just seem so trustworthy, don't they? I dare say he is stringing us along, Windsor growled. Sire, the party decorations concern us little. May we please return to the matter at hand? And don't say, which matter? Dorian froze, mouth open, on the breath he'd gathered to say just that. Momentarily thrown out of orbit, suspense mounted as he reviewed his options of a comeback. A last smile flirted with his lips, as he flirted with their sanity a final step further. Which hand? With that, the councillors surrendered. Dorian strutted into the hall like the portrait of a French monarch come to life, though without one of those dreadful wigs. Another day of political machinations conquered. It was good to be king. Quite a wonder he still had a tongue for all the times he had made a weapon of it. But his place on the courtly battlefield was coming to an end. Soon this would all be in the past. And thank God for it. The tapping of a cane announced that Clovis was speeding to catch up. My prince, if you would but slow down. He hopped into step with Dorian, fashionable walking stick clacking on the black and white tiles. Feeling victorious, are we? Shall I bother to warn you that you make more enemies each time you address the council? Dorian tugged his sleeves to perfection. You are my secretary, Clovis, not advisor. There is no cause for fuss. I treated them as I always do. Oui, en effet, with thoughtless insolence. It was rather thoughtful insolence. You border on insolence yourself, if you do not watch your tongue. The veiled threat was too veiled to disturb Clovis. He knew Dorian would never bring him to harm. That was the curse of kings who made friends. Their companions thought themselves above the law. It did not help that Clovis was nearly a decade Dorian's senior. The French native sighed in annoyance. Oh, do come down from your ether of conceit. You forget the secrets I keep for you behind closed doors. He examined his nails. Imagine if the court knew you need a ghostwriter because you struggle through the written word like a carriage through mud. Dorian whirled around and stared down that faintly moustached face. Careful, Clovis. I have the power to throw you to the dogs if it pleases me. So do not, correcting Clovis's mint-coloured bow, tempt me. But Clovis de la Fontaine would blow a kiss in the face of danger. Don't blame me when you wind up with a knife in your back. Dorian walked on. I shan't, but I might ask you to help pull it out. Now, tell me something interesting. Any word from my father of late? Clovis grazed his cane along the porcelain white wall. The monk's right to say he makes a habit of forgetting everyone's name. He recently decided he was never a king at all, and was, in fact, a clergyman. They caught him stealing a cassock. When they intervened, he scolded them for leaving his parishioners without their father. Dorian snorted. Shame I'm missing out. I do love the monk's stories. I'm only baffled he lives on. A wound like that should have killed him. Unfortunately, princes cannot get everything they want. Dorian clapped his hands, breaking the moment. See that our halls are prepared to receive my puppet tomorrow. I will accept nothing short of perfection. I have a little errand to run, and then I shall retire. He went on ahead before he spun on his heel, walking backwards. Oh, and tell the servants I'd like a hot bath. Clovis watched him go, cane propped on his shoulder. Did you not have one this morning? Dorian shrugged a shoulder. One can never have too many baths. Au revoir. He strode down the flecked tiles, his embroidered coat sparkling from the stained glass windows that ascended to heights cathedrals would envy. Ravensdale enjoyed showing off their trademark unbreakable glass, which sometimes resulted in an ice fortress effect. The grand architecture was cherry-picked from their favourite French designs: cartouches, painted boiseries, trompe-l'oeil frescoes, perfect symmetry, mirrors and windows everywhere, everything dripping with decadence like a chocolate cake. And gold. Artist and author Leverrier-Soulier had once remarked, Ravensdale is more French, even, than France. Barring hygiene, Ravensdale still won the medal on that score. Subjects hastened aside as Dorian swaggered on his warpath. The nobles nigh broke their backs in bows, some daring to glower when they thought the coast was clear. Whispered shouts darted back and forth. It's the prince! Make way! Interspersed with murmurs of the affectionate titles they had appointed him. Ah, look lively. It's the Ponce of Ravensdale. There's the Red Prince. Watch your step. Here comes the occasional king. Oh, how they sang his praises. The adoring glares of his people were ever close to his heart. He came upon a passage where glass statues of Sinclairs filled the alcoves. With a glance off his shoulder, he stole into an alcove. A gangly, square-faced lad straightened like a soldier at the sight of him. Do you have it? Dorian asked. The man withdrew a file from his breastcoat pocket. Dorian's fingers cocooned around it, the cool glass like an ice cube in his palm. It was with great risk I came by it, sire. I told you I'd intervene if anything went awry, Anatole. You're certain this will work? Pride dimpled Anatole's cheeks. I'm your poison tester. I've been poisoned enough to know which ones are lethal. I can only wonder which faithful soul you mean to use it on. Dorian tucked the file away and refastened his ruby buttons up his throat. A lifelong enemy of mine. He dropped a velvet pouch into Anatole's hand, the man's eyes widening at the chink of coins. I never came to you. Understand? Anatole gave a fervent nod. Dorian patted his head. Good boy. Let's keep this between us, Our little secret? That would make the runt feel important. He swung from the alcove with a spirited ta-ta and ate the rest of the hall with long-legged strides. There, the poison safe in his possession. He could breathe freely now. It soothed him to think, soon he would have nothing to fret over. As soon as he killed himself tomorrow night, everything would be fine.